Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Ryan once again with Sign Calibration School and the Metrology Today podcast. On today's episode, we have Walter Nowocin, and Walter is the Life Science Product Manager for IndySoft Corporation. Walter works with development, marketing, and sales to ensure that IndySoft is optimized to support calibration quality systems in regulated industries while being compliant with FDA, GMP, and ISO requirements. Walter has over 40 years of calibration experience with Medtronic, the world's largest medical device manufacturer, as well as a calibration department senior engineering manager, and with the United States Marine Corps as a precision measurement equipment laboratory master sergeant. A true master sergeant, like 6492 turned to 6491. Really interesting stuff there. Walter is a co-chair of the NCSL International Healthcare Metrology Committee and is the coordinator of the NCSLI Minnesota section. Walter is a recipient of the 2023 NCSLI Education and Training Award and is the co-author of the third edition of the ASQ Metrology Handbook, which we're going to be talking quite a bit about today. Walter has a master's in engineering management from St. Cloud University, St. Cloud, Minnesota, and is a fellow of the American Society of Engineering Management, or ASEM. It was a real pleasure to get a chance to chat with Walter, and without further ado, on with the podcast. Real quick note, if you're watching this on YouTube, I apologize. It's in 720p. That's totally my fault. I had a setting wrong. So trying to keep an eye on that for future episodes, but sorry for the lower resolution. And thanks for watching. Walter, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for the invite. I'm very much looking forward to it, though I don't want to follow Paul Reese.
Well,
you
I
won't
know.
be. You're
I know
following
that's
Chuck
a tough
Ellis,
one.
Chuck Ellis, and Howard Zion. So,
well, I don't want to follow them either.
I know this is a star-studded season.
Yes.
Well, I think Walter
Heavy
can beat
hitters.
Chuck at golf. So,
yeah. Well, I don't know. He's pretty good.
Well, the nice thing is that we're definitely getting the military represented this season. And for those of you listening, Walter is a retired Marine. So Semper Fi, Walter. Semper Fi. So I wanted to start with that, Walter, if you don't mind, because I joined in 99 to the Marine Corps. You retired in 98. But you also notice you retired as a master sergeant. But what's unique, a lot of people now that are Marines that are coming out and getting into the civilian sector, they have no idea about the depot level labs the Marine Corps had, and also that there was an MOS 6491, which was awesome. So do you mind talking about your career? Maybe just why you decided to join the Marine Corps, how you got into calibration of all things, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. So I was going to join the Air Force. I wanted to be, it was the technical service, so that's what I had in mind to do. But then my best friend in high school, he joined the Marines, and of course he spilled the beans to the recruiter of all his buddies, and next thing I knew, I got a call from a Marine Corps recruiter asking me essentially what was I going to do for the rest of my life, and I made the mistake of telling him I was going to join the Air Force.
Oh,
he said, "The hell you are." Next thing you know, I'm in the Marines. But the first 6 years of my career, I was in aviation. I worked on jets as an avionics technician directly on the jets. And I loved it. I was single. We were traveling around the world, and that was the life. Work hard, play hard was the motto. But after 6 years, I knew that when I was going to re-enlist for another 4, that was a critical decision, because as you know, once you reach that 10-year point, you might as well make it a career. Otherwise, you've kind of lost out on all that investment. So I wanted to stay in the Marine Corps, but I wanted to learn a new skill that I thought would serve me well on the outside better. But at the time, our career planners, our HR folks, were telling every one of us that we couldn't re-enlist for a different job because there wasn't any school seats open. Headquarters Marine Corps had closed them for whatever reason. So all my buddies were re-enlisting to stay doing what they're doing and not getting any benefits from that, which was crazy in my mind. I'm like, no. I told my career planner, I'm not doing that. So I told him, I said, I want my re-enlistment package to go up to headquarters Marine Corps anyway. He goes, well, that's a waste of time because there's nothing open. I said, well, I know Marines do some stupid things, and they do stupid things that allow them not to go to a school date, and the Marine Corps doesn't want to lose those seats, you know.
Oh, good
So
point.
I forced my career planner to send my package up to headquarters Marine Corps, and you've heard of dream sheets. You got your dream wish of your 3 choices of what you might want to be, and so I picked air traffic control radar technician as my number 1 choice because I knew that would be pretty lucrative. I picked number 2, computer programmer based out of New Orleans because computers were becoming the rage back in the 80s, and I wanted to get at the forefront of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 3, I picked something called PMEL. I didn't know what it was, but I knew everybody wanted it, so I put it on my list. Sure enough, a week after I submit my package up to headquarters Marine Corps, I get a call from a gunnery sergeant saying, Sergeant Nowocin, can you be at Lowry Air Force Base, Denver, Colorado in 4 days? I said, yes, I can. Matter of fact.
Nice.
So that's how I got in calibration. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was until I got there, started the school. But it changed my life, certainly,
For
because
sure.
I'm still doing it now. But I got a $30,000 bonus. I got a choice of duty station after school, and I got a new career. And all my buddies in Cherry Point, North Carolina, they were so mad. I think they could have lynched their career planner for essentially lying to them. That's what they thought. But I got a lucky break.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Like the Marine Corps really is such a rainbow and wide spectrum of experiences. You hear people getting totally shafted, and then you hear of people just right place, right time, asking the right people the right things, and it is, you put up a package. That's what it's called in Marine Corps. You put a package up and just see what happens. So that's really cool.
What happens? Yeah.
So what was your first duty station as a calibrator?
So after being at Lowry Air Force Base for about a year and a half, I went to Beaufort, South Carolina, MAL 31, supporting F4s at the time. They eventually transitioned to F-18s. So that was my first duty station. That's where I met my wife. So what a branch of paths that took for me in my life.
Now, so what was it like getting to, because I know a lot of times, when you receive a sergeant, if you're running a lab, you're expecting them to be pretty well seasoned. Was it a struggle
Yeah.
to get into it? And it surprises me you didn't know what PMEL was because working on the jets, didn't you have any red tag experiences?
Yeah, but we just thought they're, eye level. We didn't, they were all the same to us.
Sure, sure. Well, that's cool. And then, so after you retired, so obviously you go on in your career. Did you have to do squadron? I mean, as a master sergeant, usually you get assigned to a squadron. Is that what happened with you?
I did not. I was very
Oh,
fortunate to where I stayed in calibration full time. I wasn't a maintenance chief. I didn't have to go to
oh, that's
the
awesome.
squadrons in my later on career. I was very fortunate to go back to Lowry as an instructor at PMO for 3 years. I mean, that was Master Gunnery Sergeant Dodge, who's the leader of the schoolhouse at the time. I was a student of his, and then he called me one day and said, I'd like to have you come back to be an instructor. And boy, I jumped on that.
Oh yeah, best duty of my life.
Yep, exactly.
And so after the Marine Corps, so you retired. Did you take some time to kind of check things out, see what's available, or did you have something already set up?
Interestingly enough, I had a passion for teaching after my 3 years of instructor duty. So when I wanted to go on my second career, I wanted to get into teaching. I did check out Ridgewater College in Hutchinson, Minnesota to teach there. But it was kind of going a downhill slide, and that didn't have much of a future, and eventually it went away. So I avoided that situation. But I got into telecommunications because back in the late 90s, that telecommunications was going through the roof.
Hmm.
And so I got into that field, and I became a teacher of business phone systems, which was very interesting. A rack of instruments that managed the whole phone system for Fortune 500 companies. I became a teacher of that for maintainers. So I traveled to Arizona and Cleveland to help maintainers manage the phone systems within their corporations. I did that for 8 months before the company decided to outsource, or not outsource, just stop doing that service training as a entity within that company. And I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You're a service company and you're getting rid of the training group? That doesn't make sense to me. But they did. And then ultimately, long story short, I figured out my niche was as a manager of calibration, and I lucked out and got a job with Medtronic as a lab manager, and that was very fortunate for me. Another nice decision.
Gotcha. Okay. And Henry, I forgot to say hello to you, by the way, everyone. Henry is on here. He's a little under the weather today, so we're resting his voice for a minute as we're doing the Marine Corps chat. But how are you doing today, Henry?
I'm great. I love the chat with Walter. Walter is an amazing person to have on here and have as a guest and speaker. So sit back and listen. I have a few questions for Walter, having read
Awesome.
some of his chapters, and he's working right now on digital records and signatures, and we talk about all of that.
Oh yeah.
All of that stuff that's could help everybody's process.
Now, before we dive into the meat, though, one follow-on question on the Marine Corps stuff, though, Walter. So you can kind of fill in the gaps for me, because you left the Marine Corps 98. I came in at 99, so I kind of see I saw the transition of, as we started getting rid of MCCs, the depot level labs that the active duty can go to, our MOS starts shrinking. A lot of things happen over your career, my career. Those are two back-to-back, almost 20-year periods.
Right.
So were you surprised, like I was, when you came out of the service and there wasn't really anything, I guess, formal school-wise for calibration? Or it kind of feels like from what I understand, it was a nice hookup for people that were in metrology. They get out and it's like, oh, you're almost automatically guaranteed a job because there was nothing to fill those jobs. Is that kind of what you saw? Do you mind talking about that?
Ryan, I was very surprised that when I got to Medtronic and was now a hiring manager, had hired talent, find talent. I realized that the military was downgrading significantly the in talent calibration metrologist. Air Force started the initiative, and they were a huge player. They went down probably 75%, and that had an impact, and still is impacting the whole community. So then I was in a panic. It's like, I could only live on my networking in the Marine Corps for so many years, and then it was like, where am I going to get the next talent? We were fortunate in Minnesota for a little while. We had Ridgewater College in Hutchinson, Minnesota, that Herb O'Neill was the director out there and had that program going for a few years, and we were very fortunate. We got a lot of talent in Minnesota from that college. Still in Minnesota today, almost probably everyone that's in Minnesota in calibration has known about Ridgewater at some point. But Ridgewater eventually struggled and watered down the program, and then it just went to zero. We have an initiative with the NCSLI Twin Cities section. We're working with Dunwoody College in Minnesota, which is one of the most notable technical colleges in the Twin Cities, if not the whole state of Minnesota, and maybe even in the Midwest. We're trying to really get a new program going that Dunwoody is interested in, but it's an uphill battle. But yes, Ryan, get to your original question. It was very surprising to me how the education system within the United States just does not have a metrology program. I guess there was only 10 in the whole nation, and it hasn't grown that much. It's amazing.
No.
It might have retracted a little, I think.
I think you're right, Henry.
Exactly. I think you're right. It's retracted. That's crazy. It's just
I don't
insane.
know the figures. I think one of the people at Matt Denslow told me what they used to graduate, and I think it's somewhere in the half of
Yeah.
what it used to be. And it's in the peak, I believe, was the 80s. This is fuzzy logic, so I don't, please, anybody listening, do not hold me to it, because it's it's one of those things that I'm recalling based on a conversation that was 10 years ago. But I
Sure.
know the numbers have dwindled quite a bit.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I've thought about this for a little while, and companies are struggling with talent, finding talent. And what I have come up with what I think is a short-term solution for some companies to start considering that will solve some of this stopgap. And that is, there's the talent that leaves the door, the
mm-hmm.
25-year, 30-year folks who have grown in metrology and just know every nook and cranny. They walk out the door and out goes that knowledge. And so what I propose for companies that can do this, it's an investment that they have to make in the intangibles, and the payoff, as we know, will happen. And that is create a new position or positions that are essentially called trainers or mentors or whatever, and convince those folks who have 30 years experience and are leaving to say, could you stay for a couple more years and we'll put you on a part-time basis, contract, whatever, with some good incentive. To all you're going to do is mentor the young metrologist. And it can be a very focused, and it needs to be a very focused initiative. But companies can do that now. Yep, they have to create a position, and there's an investment. But the payoff is that knowledge is not escaping you 100%. You
And
can
it's a huge win,
some of that.
right?
So,
If we look at this just in simplistic, if somebody wants to do an early retirement, say somebody wants to retire at 61,
yeah,
62 or whatever, you can offer something to 66, like you said,
yeah,
Walter, and say, like, let's go, why don't we do a part-time basis, half days or whatever?
yes.
We had
And people will
numerous
like that.
people. Yeah, it's fantastic. It allows them to ease into things, because
Yes,
full on retirement is boring to a lot of people,
exactly. I
right?
Yeah.
took
But
early retirement and I wanted to stay in the field, and reached out to Red at IndySoft, and now that's where I'm at for my third great career. I didn't want to completely bail out. I have a lot to offer back to the industry, and that's what I want to do. I want to help the young folks thrive, and we need that.
we
And
do. And
that's
as people leave and walk out the door, you're right. And people aren't maintaining that information. Paul was on
No,
talking about the stealth bomber crash, that those
I
that
don't get
haven't
it.
listened
That's
to.
a it's
Yeah,
a it's a it's
crazy.
an it's a solution that can be done now.
Hmm?
And companies are just not tying into that. It can happen now. You can do a stopgap solution that I think could be part of that toolkit, that whole puzzle piece. That it's minimum dollars we're talking about, I
Well,
think.
and if you look at some of the core issues, as I'm out there training a lot of these labs, right, and I'm they're talking to them about their specific issues, what's happening in their doors. And a lot of times it's, hey, I don't feel supported. And so what you're
Right.
talking about will not only support them, but also help that individual that's doing the transition. But I know a lot of people like to, I say people, a lot of labs like to rely on the managers, right? Or like, hey, we have an on-site manager for that, or we have this technical manager or whatever. Having someone dedicated to training is where we're at in the industry. And I've been preaching the same thing you have, Walter, that you have to have someone that is somewhat their job. Even if you have support from someone like us at Sign, guess what? You could have
Yeah.
them go through an entire online program. If there's no one facilitating that training at the place on your standards and there to answer those little teeny questions that come up, we can't cover all that in the school. That's impossible.
No.
You're not going to get it.
It,
You're not going to get it at all
it,
from,
yeah,
there's too
it
many.
has to be a spider web solution here, and I think companies are not taking advantage of the talent that's leaving.
And they have to document this talent. I mean, that's what
Yes.
I've just been doing that for the last month. I've just been writing. We just started email drip campaigns for internal training, just refreshers that are 5 to 10 minutes a day that everybody in the company gets. And it's like, okay, I'm already up to 65 of these 5 to 10 minute little refreshers that,
Yeah.
people see them, and then the engineers add stuff in, and we go back, add more stuff. But that's So people learn it's auditory, visual, or kinesthetic. So to Ryan's point, you're only going to get so many people where the school's going to benefit everybody for the learning purposes. But the hands-on aspect of things, actually touching this equipment and knowing things, and there's so many of the, oh yeah, that instrument does this, right? It's just not documented.
Right.
Well, and I think this is a good time to transition into the handbook, because in the training, I also find that these days a lot of issues with people getting references, right? One of the biggest things in some of our in-person training, and especially the higher level stuff, is making people aware of papers. That's the surprising part. If you don't know about it, and I think we talked about this before, Henry, didn't we? With a guest, that if you don't know about a metrology paper, it doesn't exist. You're not going to Google and find it in a normal search. You have to know what you're looking for a lot of times.
That's right.
And even if you know, it's difficult too, because what are they saying? Some of these are written at really high levels, right? The free ones, you go dissect JCGM 106, right? I had a planetary physicist in one of my classes one time, and he could understand all of it, which was great, but the rest of the room couldn't. So it's just different levels. And there's some people that write things at super, super high levels, and then other people just are lost. And when they're lost, what happens? They just give up on it a lot of times, right? I mean,
and
there's
Walter,
like Walter would say, when you're lost and you have nowhere to go, that's where the mentor comes in. And if you don't have that mentor, how do you find the help? But
well, and that's what happens to a lot of people, right? Right now, they're on an island, basically, and they could have a group of 5 of them, but maybe they don't have that quote unquote metrologist there that can answer their questions. They're kind of the blind leading the blind. So Walter, you contributed to well, both of you contributed to the metrology handbook. Walter, do you mind talking about the sections that you worked on?
Sure. First of all, I like to mention that it was quite an honor for Heather to reach out to me, Heather Wade, the editor, to reach out to me to participate in that, because it was a goal of mine to do that at some point in my career, because of my colleague, the late great Jay Bucher, from Madison, Wisconsin, up here in Minnesota. We knew Jay very well, and the rest of the metrology community knew Jay, and he was the first editor. He was the editor to the first 2 editions of the handbook, and for me to participate in that, it was a great honor. And so, yeah, I was able to contribute 3 chapters 15, 17, and 18. One was dealing with quality systems. So having been in the biomedical FDA arena, I was able to update the sections on the FDA for quality systems. Training, I've been training all my life. And so I was able to take that chapter and add some things in there. And Ryan, I threw in some Marine Corps MAP training syllabuses format in there.
Nice.
For on-the-job training matrix, for one example. And then also, as a very knowledgeable in software validation, helped update that chapter and bring in things that weren't talked about before, like, for instance, spreadsheets and how you can control and manage them and need to. And also software validation provided a lot more detail as far as the 3 phases of software computer system management, which is how do you select it, how do you implement it, and then how do you maintain it. And so it greatly added to that section, those 3 details. And then the idea of automation, we use automated software to manage our instrument calibration, but there's 2 aspects of that. There's the software that executes the automations, and then there's the code that actually does kind of like mimics the procedure. And so those 2 different types of validations need to happen: a validation of the system and verification of the executables. And so that's now in the handbook.
Nice.
And
Yeah,
there's
a lot
also
of those things that, I was just gonna say, a lot of those things that weren't thought of when the last one was created, right?
Right.
Oh, there are so many questions in this, Ryan, but I want to point out for those that can see, Walter has, this is the one chapter on training. He has a breakdown. It's called KASI, KASI, that I wanted Walter to talk about because this is near and dear to my heart because it starts with knowledge, attitude, skills, interpersonal skills, but under interpersonal skills, he talks about engagement because that's what we've been talking about as an ongoing theme about people being engaged. And if you don't have that engaged workforce, how good is the quality of your end product, whether it's an actual physical product, a calibration, or whatever it is?
Yeah. I'll point out that that particular section of the chapter was, I think, was contributed by Georgia Harris, if I'm not mistaken. She participated in some aspects of that chapter, and I think that was one area that she contributed.
Georgia Harris at NIST.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's touring the country in an RV with her husband. That's the great flutist, Randy.
Here we
Can't
go.
remember. But Georgia's a phenomenal person. We're hoping to get her on here to talk about things. She's also done some chapters.
Wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and it's engagement, and it's just. But on the validation side, because everybody dreads this, and there's getting your point of view on this. Commercial off the shelf. Somebody will say, "Oh, somebody else sells it. I can just buy it, and I don't have to do anything." Is that a stance that people should actually take? It seems ludicrous to me.
It is ludicrous, and the FDA doesn't state, their expectation is that it doesn't matter whether you got it from a third party. If you're using it, you own it, and you're responsible to making sure that the quality is correct for the end use. And also GAMP, which is a pharmaceutical ISPE organization, has some GAMP documents, and one is on computer software, GAMP 5, I believe it is. And GAMP 5 says the same thing. You need to make sure that you are verifying. You don't have to validate the code. Yeah, the supplier did that. Yeah, so you don't have to do that. But you do have to verify that the software meets your needs. You still have to you can't take it wholesale. You have to do some verifications on site to ensure that it does what it claims to do. But you don't have to validate the code. You just have to oversee the supplier from a quality aspect, from an audit aspect, to make sure the supplier has good practices in place that you can feel at a risk level that what they're producing is good quality. And then you're going to verify that.
Codes get steep, and you always miss something. I would think almost anyone that's making code right now, there's probably some bugs in almost anything if we look hard enough.
Yes.
And where are those? Do they impact for calibration? Do they impact the results? Are you running are they running the test cases? Are they using NIST has their own set of validation protocols. It's daunting. NIST verification, and you know this, Walter, their verification and validation, it takes a heck of a lot of time, as does the NRCs, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we kind of want that, though. I mean, if we're the reactors, we don't really want bugs in their, powering our reactors to produce energy.
Right. Yeah. For IndySoft, for example, I help them with the validation document for biomedical customers, and it's 200 pages of protocols to make sure that the calibration management software system does as is intended.
Now, isn't that an area of specialty for you, is the biomedical and pharmaceutical end? As they call it.
Ryan, what was that again?
Isn't that one of your specialties now, is life sciences, pharmaceutical, all that stuff? So what have you been seeing of that? That's been growing like crazy. Even since I've been retired here in the Salt Lake Valley, it's enormous in medical manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, all that stuff. But it also scares me because the people I see doing this stuff in metrology labs out there in these billion-dollar facilities, it's concerning. They're not even military trained. They're not anything trained, really. They're kind of in-house trained. I mean, what have you been seeing out there with stuff like that?
Well, even at Medtronic, which is a Fortune 500 company. We had probably about 40 business sites that had calibration labs, and it was typically most of them were 1-person, 3-person labs supporting an operation. That's 1,000, 3,000 instruments coming through that 2-man lab, and that's a lot of hats those 2 people are wearing,
Right.
right?
With a lot of risk.
That's a lot of risk coming through that pipeline there.
Yeah. What if one retires?
I would say
leaves?
that there's calibration is if you do the fundamentals, you have to kind of do a lot wrong for to impact a product at the end, because there's operations in biomedical are pretty robust. Their qualifications of an install qual, operational qual, production qual is pretty robust. You can't get through that process without having a pretty well controlled production operation. And calibration plays one part of that from a verification of the instruments, right?
Right.
So there, you kind of, it's nice to have that bell curve, right? That quality bell curve that you can move within. And then if, as long as the production folks are picking instruments that are 4 times, keeping that 4 times all the way through the pipeline, there's a lot of shifting you can do. So yeah, that's why you don't see a lot of issues, right? Hitting the bottom line is because the pipeline has so much robustness in it. There's a lot of chains in that link to identify something that's getting out of control. And calibration, verifying instruments is one part of that chain. Is that what I'll tell you?
So do you think it's beneficial? Because I notice a lot of these positions, as people are looking at them, they'll have life science degree requirements. Do you think that is vital for people working in the biomedical fields, or is just your general calibration knowledge going to be enough?
General calibration knowledge is enough to get you into the door and do the day-to-day things. I didn't have any biomedical experience when I became the manager of the Medtronic calibration lab. I didn't know the FDA, but I had NavAir quality system protocols, right? Making sure aircraft can fly safely has some quality parameters to that I was able to bring with me, transferable skill and knowledge to the biomedical field. And then I had a mentor in the lab, Walt Peterson, who'd been with Medtronic since the 60s, and actually was one of the first writers of the recommended practice 6 for the biomedical industry. He was my mentor, and he told me about the FDA and about inspections and requirements and regulations, and I learned them to help supplement my avionics quality system knowledge. So I did start from zero. I had some transferable skills that helped me be successful. But no, I don't know. To get into any industry, calibration is calibration, as we know. That's the great thing about calibration, is that it crosses all industries. An oscilloscope can be used in nuclear, aviation, or life sciences, and you're calibrating an oscilloscope. But each of those regulatory industries have their own particular overhead of expectations, and that's what you got to learn. But no,
like
I don't think it's
the
not
GMP,
critical.
like the general good manufacturing practices. Like I always tell the story when I'm teaching temperature, pressure, and stuff on site, that I went to one of these places and they have the floor marked out where you're not supposed to go unless you have changed shoes or put booties on or whatever. And one of our people were taking a new technician through to learn a calibration in the clean area, and that technician walked past some people talking into that area and back over into the dirty area to change. And things like that are extremely important, because that can shut down a whole operation just by walking in the wrong areas.
That's what companies need to do and typically do a good job with what I would call onboarding, where you're bringing in a new person, no matter what their experiences are, and you're giving them insights to how we work at this site and what are the safety things and what are the regulatory things and production things. So you don't throw someone. If I had a new technician coming into the biomedical lab, I wouldn't automatically put them on an on-site work schedule into a clean room. I would put them in the lab working stuff off the shelf that are being delivered to us, and then give them on-the-job training where they're mentoring, being job shadowed by someone who's experienced to go on the floor.
Yeah.
So that would be the way you do it.
I see. Thank you, Walter. You're reinforcing what I've been telling people everywhere. Like on site, in a lot of cases, I think it's a level. We have levels, right, at our school, level one,
Yeah.
2, 3. I think it's a level 2 job. You have to
Yeah.
have some serious experience so that you're not just doing the right things, right, but also you're aware of contributors around you to the
Mm-hmm.
that are going to ruin your measurement process right there, where it's the most, arguably the most important for them.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
and how many people just go to, here's your job, make this measurement, do it, boom, 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 boom. Don't
Right.
tell
All
them
the
about any
time.
influences, anything else.
Yeah.
Well,
Just
and
go
they
do
are
it.
sending brand new people into people's facilities, and those are the ones that scare me, Walter. The
Yeah.
FDA, pharmaceutical, like we have BioFire here that creates the vaccinations and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's just really important, you know.
Some of it is super important, and others they have what the risk built. Walter knows, and others they have the risk built in. One of our team members that joined us went to one of these places, and he lasted a week. He said he went there, he took the job, he was really excited about it, and the guy that he was working with was super excited and said, "Man, I sleep here sometimes." And that this guy was so overworked, he couldn't go. He had to work during
Yeah.
Christmas, everything else. And he was just like, yeah, sometimes I just take a half an hour nap at my desk because they're shifting, multiple shifting him. And he's so happy. And our guy's like, no, this is not for me. So that I always think that poor guy that was so happy to see someone new come in because it was the end of most of his misery, right? To have someone else that could help and he could train. But yeah, they run people hard. And they can, not all of them do, but there's so many stories out there that you're just throwing right, you're drinking, like Dylan likes to say, you start drinking from the fire hose right away.
Yeah. That's why onboarding is something that it needs to be purposeful, detailed, and consistent. And it's not done that way all the time.
Hiring too, a step before that, you got to choose the people, make sure they have the skill set, make sure
Right.
they're going to fit in with the current culture that's there too. And yeah, there's sometimes it's gotten better. I think recently it's opened up a bit, but during COVID, it was a warm body. I think we all felt the warm body syndrome that people were just they needed anybody and they were willing to take a gamble on almost anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the hiring situation gets to where it is now, where they're basically saying, "Hey, if you have electronics experience, if you have mechanical experience, come
That's
in."
right.
You know, you're and we were talking earlier in this podcast about the buy-in, right? And I think there's not many industries like ours where it's super important for the person to care and to buy in, right? Because it really comes down to a lot of those measurements. I can put down on a piece of paper whatever I want in a lot of cases, right? I have to have the integrity and the willingness to participate in the system and the importance of it for that to happen. And I think if we're, and this is, I mean, this gets into a whole ball of worms, right? Because you're talking about retaining some of that top talent.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're seeing biomedical and pharmaceutical manufacturing and companies steal our people because of straight up the compensation, right? Those industries I mean, I'll just throw out some numbers that I hear around there, and I won't throw anyone under the bus, but we're like, a normal cal lab, a third party cal lab's losing people to a biomedical lab that's paying them double. The cal lab's able to pay them like 80,000, let's say.
Yes.
Biomedical's paying them 160, 150, 140s. And but Now, the catch is, right, what happens to those people? They do those jobs, they do this big buildup, and there are times that those people get let go after whatever process that they're creating or building, whatever new product or whatever thing they're verifying, right, goes away. That job goes away as well. So, I mean, that's also a big challenge out there, wouldn't you agree? How can we
Yeah,
retain
well,
people? Is there budget to
in
retain people?
Minneapolis, you know, we have a lot of industries all competing for a very reduced amount of talent pool, and so I would lose technicians, even though I was in biomedical, I'd lose them to 3M in a numbers that were eventually we call 3M 4M, 3M plus Medtronic, because they've taken so many of my folks.
Wow.
It's a tough. If I'm a metrologist, it's a good thing because I can find work, right? People are coming to me with offers and opportunities. So it's good to be a metrologist, but we just can't get enough people to be metrologists. That's crazy, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, and that's the hard part. You know, we mentioned the colleges. I know my own personal experiences, Walter. I've contacted quite a few community colleges around the country, some here in Utah, very interested in having me teach their electronics program.
Yeah.
Not so much to do a full metrology program, right? And it's like, no,
Right.
that's not what I do. You know, I can do the electronics, but also all the other, please. You know, and it
Yeah.
seems like there's some reluctance out there to have those. And I don't know if it's, do colleges get burned? You know, they offered it at one point in time. Is there a list of profitable degrees to have? And like colleges all kind of just go by that? Like, I don't understand how that works, really.
People
Well,
don't know.
for example, Dunwoody, you know, we're trying to work with them to get something going, but they flat out told us you're going to compete with robotics, and robotics is just winning like crazy. Uh, that's tough competition to try to convince a potential student to choose one or two paths. Metrologist, which sounds like the weather, or robotics, which I like working with robots.
Well, and at the surface, right? Like even as I'm
Yes,
trying to create YouTube videos or TikTok or whatever, it's hard to make measurements interesting. But I think we can all
yes,
attest, like the people that come on these podcasts and people like us, Walter, where we fall in love with the industry, right? And I think
right.
it is something that a lot of people will like. But yeah, they get kind of wooed by the hot thing right now, which is robotics, I
Yes,
guess.
AI and robotics, right?
that's our competition.
Well, I'm glad you brought up AI, Henry. I've been asking
Yeah.
everybody, what do you think of AI, the future of AI in our field, Walter?
Well, I'm not that knowledgeable in artificial intelligence. I mean, I know enough to be dangerous. I guess I'll just weigh in on Henry to weigh in on him and what he sees out there.
Oh, I love it. I think the analytics that this brings. I also like blockchain technology, but I'm not a big fan of cryptocurrency. It's a whole different situation there. But with I love the idea on where calibration reports could go. If you have
Hmm.
all your data and you load it all in, the trends that you could spot, because someone's got to sort through or they got to physically type something in, time after time after time. And
Yeah.
you could program an algorithm to say, hey, this thing, we have our control charts and stuff, which are great, but people don't put all of that on instruments. So if we could get real-time data, I envision there'll be chips in almost everything that can tell you the number of load cycles before something wears out.
Yeah.
Right. And then we can say like, hey, this was used to this. If we want to go back, it'd be real interesting to know let's take torque, for example. Real interesting to know on Wednesday during 11 to 12 o'clock that whatever technician there was bolting something to 75 pound-feet instead of 100. Right. And instead of doing a circular pattern of 12, they were only hitting 8 or something. They weren't engaged. They were hung over and, whatever. But I think there's some catches, a lot of catches there. And I really think the data analytics are going to be huge for people. Because right now, Greg, one of Walter's coworkers, and we talk about risk and we talk about, test uncertainty ratios, measurement capability indexes, and and how much money you can save if you can really reduce your risk down. But the analytics are going to get us so fine on so companies can actually look at this and hopefully pinpoint those problems and say, hey, my measurement system is out of whack, right? And now they should be using control charts. Not all of them are doing that. They are not training everybody the way they should. But again, analytics and training, if you're monitoring that process and people putting things out, I think it's going to make things a bit better for all of us in the long run. And I'm really excited because you guys have all seen it. Somebody sends you problematic equipment and they are just so convinced that they bought the right equipment and they will never give up. Right? I already paid $5,000 for this. I'm not giving up on it. And you're like, okay, so you're going to have it calibrated every 6 months instead of every year to 2 years. And what's that cost? You know, there's a cost there that at the end of 5 years, if you would have just bought the more expensive equipment, you would have more confidence in the measurement, less risk, and so on and so on. So I think AI can bring that, the analytics at least. Right now, I mean, the last thing I did on it, I pulled a bunch of stuff for end of period reliability, and I think AI you load in all your reports and say pull all of this stuff, ignore the customer names, just look at model numbers and everything else, and I think you can get some really awesome trends there when you feed these algorithms.
Well, and speaking
of, it's
yeah,
very exciting.
Go ahead, Walter. Sorry.
It's very exciting. Unfortunately, if we're talking about Cal Labs in a Fortune 500 company, we're kind of at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to where the investment's going to be made. And the artificial intelligence investments can be made into production floors, right, where it should be.
Yep.
And then hopefully at some point it gets to the front end where the instruments are being selected, Henry, as you suggested, and that we start learning back at that end.
Well, we know,
it'll take a little while, but that's the pipeline.
It's going to be on the production floor, and it's going to be the beginning. It's going to be replacing people, like AI assistants, right? For customer interaction. Talking to a live person is probably not going to happen for a lot of these companies. Someone's going to sell them this AI package that 24/7 you can ask it a question, and it should answer it for you. It might get that good. Right now, what I've seen on this, it's just annoying. It's like, no, I want this. It's still, it's like there's a phone, the silly ads where it's like, press 1 for this, and you press till you press, 4 or 5 menu items down, you're still not getting what you want. But AI's kind of that way now, where you ask something a question and it doesn't give it to you, right? And then you ask it again, and oh, I'm sorry, I don't have this, or whatnot, or tries to give you an answer that's probably not what you're asking for.
Or like our temp guru.
Potential's definitely there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, Thomas Harper, he had put in, he just asked it, what's the melting point of silver or something, one of the fixed points, and it was the wrong one. It was like 10 or something like that, and he was like, isn't that the one for 10? I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Oh yeah, my bad.
You have to watch. It does confuse things. I mean, AI with metrology is probably going to be one of the last things to get everything right. It does get some of the stuff right, but yeah, go stick in some stuff into AI. I forget what I said. Yeah, it was. It's all over the place, but it is getting better.
Yeah, Walter, are you familiar with I forget what the actual committee is called, but Mike Schwartz is working on it, where it's the digital certificates and all that.
Oh, metrology.
I've heard.
Taxonomy.
Taxonomy. Yes.
Taxonomy. It's a taxonomy.
I don't have my hands on in that. I peripherally know about it and understand what they're going after and the challenges they have. And Henry addressed several of those from the AI perspective, and that's kind of what they're running up against. The main thing is just kind of standardizing. Is what are we going to call things? If you can't agree at the very basic fundamental building block level, none of this is going to work. And so that's the challenge that group is having, is what are we going to call all of these things? That's heavy lifting. But boy, if they can get past that, then it's a smoother road. Then you're putting things together after that, but you solved the problem of commonality.
Well, the reason I bring it up is I see all these things kind of converging at once, right? None of them are quite there yet, but we're talking 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
That's right.
You have all the digital certificates, we have digital training certificates, we have, all these things converging at once, and then the ability to analyze it with the AI. It's going to be
Yes.
super interesting.
That's right. It's gonna the payoff will come. They'll all come together, Ryan, as you say, and then it's going to be astounding what will result from that.
I'm the eternal pessimist. I hate to be the pessimist.
Yeah.
I'm that guy that you say, hey, that glass with yellow stuff in it is half full. Anyway, Ryan says it's half full. Walter, you say it's half empty, and I'm the guy that says, is it pee? Are we even talking about the right thing? So at
Right.
that point, we all have to agree on one thing. What's going to happen likely, and this is where I'm the pessimist on it, is
Yeah.
that they have to agree on one. Like if the PTB and the Europeans are doing something else,
Yes.
then you have a big company over here that's saying, no, I don't want to do what the NCSLI committee wants to go. I want to do our own. And then somebody else, we're going to be the leaders over here, and we've got something better. We're just going to tweak this. Now you have like 10 or 15 different systems. Everybody's confused, and the efficiency of the whole thing is going to be a chaotic mess, right?
Yep.
If we can
That's the
all just
challenge.
agree, the challenge is if we can all just agree this is going to be the format of this thing and this is what's going to happen, we
Yeah.
could get really far really fast. And
That's the crux of the matter.
but everybody wants to argue that. Everybody, the one guy used to tell me, and I hate this terminology, but I think it's so true, is no one wants to kill their puppies, which means they have this idea that they think is the greatest idea. And some of these people are very influential and powerful.
Yep.
And it's like they will never realize that their idea is bad. 20, 40, 50, 100 people, and they'll stick with it. And it's someone said, yeah, it's realizing that you have that cute puppy that you love so dearly, you got to let it go.
Yep.
And when we
definitely challenging.
When we talk about pain points, I mean, what you're talking about, Henry, if we get to that point, I mean, that's going to harm the lowest level, right? If technicians no matter where they're going, if they're going from lab A to lab B and they have different systems completely like that, it's a whole nother language you're learning a lot of times. And if we further complicate that with all this, it's not going to be good. I was going to bring that up as Walter was talking about documentation. I'm sure you agree, Walter, like Marine Corps, we're filling out meter cards and, hand documentation is just so horrible nowadays where, I mean, I see labs that are out there working, doing on-sites have huge amounts of workload, but they're double documenting like Henry's saying, and so I think that is an extremely important part to focus on if you are trying to refine some processes. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It for sure. It sure is. I mean, we have to laugh. We always say we're looking at opportunities to be better, but when you talk about government processes, it's getting those to get changed is very, very difficult, right? Once they have a procedure there, you both have been in this, and something's outdated, and it's like an act of God to change something, right? Because how many people does it need to go through, and what's the cost of it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Walter sees that a lot in the regulated communities where everything has to be approved before a change is made, and it could be the most brainless thing. Like there was one with a weighing device that I think they had just the procedure that they had written. They wanted us to do it because it was an important balance or something like that. But they had written it in a way that didn't make sense metrologically. And I explained it to him. And I showed him why it was going out of tolerance. But it took 2 months for them to approve that. And it's like, come on.
Yep.
It's a very simple change. Now, speaking of which, I did notice because we are getting towards the end. This has really flown by. I did want to hit the topic that you brought up, Walter. I don't know if we have. You can tell me if we covered it sufficiently. But you mentioned post calibration as we were kind of chatting about topics before the podcast.
Yeah.
Did you want to mention talk
do.
about that concept?
Yeah, I can do it I think pretty quickly. I'm going to write an article about this. It's astounding to me that post-calibration is, I think, very important. We kind of discovered that in Medtronic when we finally uncovered it, is the idea that we worry about calibrations at the front end and we make sure we do it and it's on schedule. But then at the point at the retirement end, when we're going to remove the equipment from service or inactivate it temporarily or whatever, the end of life, we don't do what we would call a closeout calibration automatically. You will not find the term post-calibration or closeout calibration in almost any regulatory document. ISO 17025 don't talk about it. Nowhere is that term mentioned. And so about 10 years ago, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, when we were doing our analysis of a gap assessment of our quality system, we're always trying to improve, the iceberg effect, keep on trying to whittle that down. We came across hey, how come we're not doing post-calibrations? And we're like, what? And it was astounding to me when we finally looked into it. It's like, you're right. We don't have a process in our quality system where we're doing a risk assessment of should we or not do a post-calibration. We don't ask that question. We let them end of life it and off we go. And so, yeah, we eventually put in a document, a post-calibration assessment document, where, because we knew that we didn't have to calibrate everything, right? You don't want to make a blanket statement to do that. First of all, that's resources. You don't have the resources for that to automatically add 100% new calibrations to your workload. So we wanted to do a risk assessment to kind of bring this down to what could be manageably do on the most risky elements of this. And so we had our customers submit a form if they chose not to do a post-calibration. We did allow them an out. They fill out the form so we'd have a documented evidence of the decision. And the rationale choices were some things like instrument not used since previous calibration. Okay, that could be a rational thing to reason not to do it. Instrument not used to support any process that requires final closeout measurement data. Yeah, that's reasonable rationale. Here's the one that got a little more tricky. The instrument calibration history indicates high reliability. Well, what's the target? What's the target for that? What we chose, and anyone can poke a hole in it, but we put a stake in the ground.
6 out of 10 calibrations were good.
Yeah, you got to put a stake in the ground. And our stake in the ground was, if the instrument passed the last 3 calibrations, that's a sign that it's reliable and probably would hold its measurement. So anyway, I don't know about you guys, but that's astounding to me how that's not talked about at all. It may be implied, but if it's implied, that doesn't mean it's done. And so I'm going to write an article highlighting this. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, and some of this is like, I'm just speaking coming from the military systems. This is probably why it's also on your wavelength, Walter, is that we're used to that, right? If we have to inactivate something for, again, whatever reason, you don't know if that's going to be used again, and you don't want to find out when you're trying to use it again that it's bad.
Right.
So that
right.
I remember those type of things, because you want to, or like you're saying, if we inactivate it, of course, inactivation would be a way to hide things, right? If you don't have a way of documenting that status, as found as left of the thing. So yeah, I actually wrote it down. That's something I think I can add into the curriculum as well, because you're right. I have not heard that.
No.
I'm trying to think of anywhere I've taught where they talk about that process.
No,
what about you, Henry?
Personally, I think if you're running statistical control charts, you can validate it. But you're going to have to be running against instruments that have no good calibration cycles, not everything that you're pulling out. If I had 3 multimeters and I see one's like trailing off with the SPC curve, I want to pull it out of service, I'm like, okay, it's still in, but I can spot that trend and it's 20 years old. Do I really want to put more money, or do I want to get a new one? If I compare it against another 2 that have good and valid cals, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay if I'm testing it every week or every month, and I can see that every month against these other 2 meters, I'm good. So I think there's a lot of knowledge to bring back to statistical process control and control charts into this. But yeah, what we tend to see is what? Just anybody, I send my instrument for Cal, it's gone for a week to a month or whatever the length is. I get it back, I start using it, and then, okay, I'm not going to use it anymore. So we're just going to say, okay, looked like it was good. Like Walter said. Now, when we were in a class at NCSLI, it was really interesting. The one group that was there, I started making notes. I'm in this class, taking a class with Andy and Rob, and I'm starting taking notes on these two people and listening to a talk. I'm like, they have some great ideas. Some of the stuff that they were doing, I think with temperature, they had a really high-end temperature device. They had it calibrated once, never had it calibrated again. It sat on the wall, and it was a monitoring device that they would use, and they would check all their other standards against. And the guy was very specific. If I take it away from the wall, I disturb it, right? And there's risk of something that could happen in transport or whatever, anything else. So this is like our gold standard as far as our validation, what you were talking about earlier, right, Walter? This is our gold standard as far as if we want to validate something, we're going to it. It's not changing, and we're doing frequent comparisons against calibrated artifacts. So that whole system of checks and balances, so to say. But I thought that was really interesting that they just hung one and put it on their wall, never to be touched or calibrated again.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a pretty good practice. Now, I wouldn't recommend everybody do. I mean, you have to have instruments in calibration. You're not referencing back to that instrument on the wall, and you're not establishing traceability to that. You're just using it as another tool that can help ensure your system is functioning properly. There's a big distinction between actually using it for a measurement versus using it for like that check. That kind of this is our check to make sure things are good. Well, I found that I just found them. They had a lot of those little hacks along the way with a lot of things they did just to ensure their process was functioning. So Ryan, we had one more thing to discuss with Walter, and that was checklist, right? Walter's electronic records and checklists, and I'm of the belief that checklists should be used for everything. Any procedure should have. I've spoken before, and I'm politicking on it. Any procedure should have a checklist at the back of it, because asking somebody to read a procedure 20, 50, 100 times when they can probably grasp it at 2 times and have that checklist and follow it to a high degree of certainty, I think. But the electronic records, the stuff you're working on now, Walter, can save people a lot of time. So I think that's probably a really good end to this, to have that discussion on what you're working on and how it can save companies a lot of time.
Henry, it's a good segue because I'll be presenting a paper at the Measurement Science Conference in March on that very topic, titled The Hidden Value of 21 CFR Part 11, which is the FDA regulation on electronic records, electronic signatures. And one part of that paper is, the hidden value punchline, I'll let people know, is that 21 CFR Part 11 regulation, though it's not required for all industries, is a nice outline of the things you need to consider to make sure that your system can do managing of records and signatures well. And I show in the paper how you can come up with a checklist from the regulation to where you can get a good feel for whether your current system is adequate or one that you're evaluating is adequate. And I use the old ABC analogy that if 80% of your checklist you've met, then you've got a B score. And what does that mean? It's a comparison thing. Is the other software in the A category, or are they in the C category? So, Henry, you're absolutely right. Checklists are very valuable. And what I show is that you can use the regulation to come up with a checklist that you could then use to evaluate what you have or what you're trying to select.
How about the discussion on electronic signatures and records? Because there's still people that are pushing papers here, Walter, and they like that. And they're not only are they killing a lot of trees, but it just seems like it's some of this stuff does seem bureaucratic.
Yes, and the industry that you're in. If you're in biomedical, you fall under the 21 CFR Part 11. you have to make sure that your software can manage records well with audit trails, passwords, security controls, all those sort of things. And then you can use electronic records, but your system has to be able to manage that effectively for traceability, right? So it's not that difficult, really. Most software these days are powerful enough to do that, but your legacy systems aren't robust to talk, first of all, audit trails or password control. Your analytical equipment, for the most part, I think is a gap in that regard, to where your HPLCs, your GCs are software driven, but they're not locked down from access to levels of being able to change codes. It's just not that sophisticated. And so that's a gap, because now you got people that can change the code and override pass. Yep. They'll get a pass. They'll force a pass through the analytical software that was failing 10 times before. They'll run it and run it and run it until they get the numbers they want, is a rough outline example.
Well, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, Henry, do you still go to the RP3 meetings? I haven't been able to go, but is the checklist something that they're including into that guidance as well?
I believe we were at refresh my memory on here. I got a little bit.
Procedure writing.
The procedure writing. Yeah, that was Bill Miller's one. We were talking about that the other day. I'm getting confused between RP6 and 3. And then, of course, now we're on LM1. That one was done. I do not think we hammered home on the checklist as far as the procedures, and we probably should have. Unfortunately, Bill Miller passed during that where we were wrapping it up. But we had a lot of work done on it, and it was all but done. But yeah, after the fact, you read a book like the Checklist Manifesto, the book I always recommend, and you're like, wow, I want to go to the hospitals that are using checklists, because guess what happens? They go through and they make sure everything's right before they do a surgery on you. Poor Walter goes in and he doesn't go to the right hospital, and they going to operate on his left leg, and then they end up removing his right index finger. And they don't use their checklist. Dumb things happen all the time, you know.
Well, Henry, you'll like this, that IndySoft validation document that we put together. That's 200 pages.
I've seen it. I asked for it. I saw it. It was pretty awesome.
The back of it is a what I call a punch list. It's a one-page checklist that a person can go through to say, these are the things I need to have happen as part of my software validation. I'm picking my menu of choices, a grocery list of what I need to have happen with the software validation for my compliance. And so it's a punch list, one page that covers 200 pages of choices.
I've seen it. I've seen it get ridiculous too, Walter, where people say you have to reference the current version of Windows that you're on. Yeah. And to me, a lot of people out there listening are probably like, oh, what's the big deal? It's Windows 11. No. They're not talking about Windows 11. They're talking about every time your system updates and it's some K number on the update that you have to reference. I've seen auditors actually say, this is what you need to reference. And we're like, no, you have updates for Windows like every, 2 weeks. What is that going to, what impact is, if we deem that it's just an operating system, that's not going to impact the software. Why do we need to reference back to the Windows K26, whatever the long number string it is?
Yeah, patch. Whatever patch it's on.
Whatever patch it is. Did you have any comments on that one? Walter, throwing you under the gun on that one, because I know.
Yeah, that one's a slippery slope. I would say it depends. It would be my favorite answer to that, because we have found where Microsoft pushes out a release, and it does impact something that we had been doing routinely for years. So it is a slippery slope. That's why you do validate to a state of Windows to prove that it works with that version. And usually that's a major version, right? 11, 12, XP or whatever. And you have a way of catching things that are done with patches. So you're monitoring your software well enough to where you can capture when things might be going a little bit astray, and then you can reevaluate at that point, do your causation analysis. But yeah, that's a slippery slope. I think it's a risk-based decision, Henry, to where I would say you validate to the major release, you have controls and monitoring in place that would hopefully capture a patch incompatibility. And so you're not going to validate to every patch because you're doing a risk-based approach to where, and that's how you operate. And let's just say somewhere down the road, a patch did impact something, then you would reassess your risk decisions and then put more oversight in. But Henry, I would say that it's a risk-based decision.
Yep.
That, yeah, we're going to take some things on face value. That's a risk-based choice on things that, may not matter as much. And so that's how, you can only make decisions of what you know. This is not 100% world. It's a gray world. And that's why risk analysis is so important, is because we live in a gray world. So,
well, and I've seen out there some of those ones you're talking about, and I won't go into too much detail that will get me in trouble, but places that are high risk, right? And maybe they'll have things like, off the top of my head, like those Pixies, from National Instruments or whatever, where they'll have a computer that they never update. They don't connect it to the internet or anything, because that's right, set up and running and it does not get touched.
And that's a risk-based approach assessment, right? In our lab, we did have a segment of our automated computer systems that were completely isolated on their own inner hub. They did not get push downs from IT automatically. They were isolated because how important they were running manufacturing test consoles that test medical devices. And so that was a validated protocols that was not to get changed at all, period. It was locked down and isolated. But that was maybe 3% of everything we did? Yeah, it's a risk-based assessment, and then you have guardrails around that.
Well, that's why sometimes you'll go to Cal Labs and you see computers running, what is it, 98 or
yeah.
That's
right. ME,
XP.
Exactly. And it's not because you don't want to spend the money. It's because, unfortunately, the protocols that were validated were under that environment, and no one wants to do the new validations to prove something different. They don't have time.
Even the bits, it changed to 64-bit. Now we're all 64-bit operating, and that.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I was going to say, like, if you have no good data sets and you can run those through the system, that's just one little piece of it. I was looking for the NIST, the NIST procedure, which you're probably familiar with, Walter. That their procedure is pretty robust.
Yeah.
I don't think every lab's doing that, because anytime one of those little patches would come to go through everything would probably kill a lot of the small commercial labs. Honestly.
That's why you have to operate at gray, right? You protect what you can, and you monitor for deviation.
And hopefully you have a system in place to say, hey, I want to know what this patch contained, and does that patch, like I know our guys, does that patch interfere with anything? Yeah. And if it's a
review.
Yeah, you just do a review of the patch. That's a lot easier than going through the whole software system.
A quick verification.
Right.
A checklist verification, Henry.
There you go.
Bang. Now, Walter, to end things off, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a fun one, because I don't know if you've heard our podcast before, but I like to ask guests the weirdest thing they've ever calibrated. Howard Zion, the last one, Howard Zion mentioned like a wobulator or something, which was I never heard of before. You have anything weird that you've ever have come across your bench?
Yeah, I'd say the most interesting calibration we did in the Marine Corps was, because we worked on jets and we worked on airfields, was what was called the compass rose. And the compass rose is a part of the airfield that's magnetically aligned and etched into the pavement that shows the magnetic north. And every jet aircraft had to go to that compass rose every 30 days to get their main alignment systems oriented to the magnetic earth north. And we had to calibrate that every 6 months, I think it was. And we had to go out there at night on a clear new moon or whatever, so we could shoot the North Star with this MC Deuce instrument, like Magellan probably did when he went around to southern South Africa. We had to shoot the North Star and then align it to the pavement to make sure that we were plus or minus 2 degrees, whatever it actually was. That was the most interesting thing. That was pretty cool.
I'm glad you brought that up, because if the compass rose is down, your life is hell at the Cal Lab. Like, the compass rose always needs to be up and running for flight ops.
You got that right.
Awesome. Well, Walter, I can't thank you enough. I just like every guest, there's so much more we could talk about, but I think that was a really great episode, and I love how everyone has their different focuses, and it gives everybody kind of gives everybody exposure to things that I think we all need to be thinking about.
Well, thank you very much, guys. Training has always been in the forefront for me and will continue to be. And I truly respect you, Ryan, and Henry, for what you do for the metrology community from a training perspective. You guys are doing great work. So thank you. And thank you.
I'd love to have a fellow author of the Metrology Handbook on board. And I'm happy that you came on the show here, Walter. If anybody wants to see or has more interest, like, how do they reach you, and where you're presenting at MSC, you said, and I assume NCSLI, are you also where else are you going to be presenting? Just so people
I'm going to be presenting in April at A2LA, but it's the same presentation that I'll be doing at MSC. I'm doing the technical presentation MSC, but I'm also doing an all-day tutorial on the 3 phases of software validation, which is: how do you select it? How do you implement it? And how do you maintain it?
That's awesome. So that's at MSC.
Yeah.
And
I believe the tutorial, I haven't got confirmation, but more than likely it'll be at NCSLI as well. And people can reach me by my email, walter.nowocin, NOWOCIN, at IndySoft.com. Or you can go straight to IndySoft.com and see the contact list there as well.
Well, thank you. And the one final thing, which I probably said before, but there was another one. This year, Walter won. He joins one of the best honors that I've had in my career, the Educated and Training Award from NCSLI. Walter was last year's recipient. So
congratulations, Walter. I missed the NCSLI last year, so I didn't. Yep. Congratulations. That's
awesome.
I
followed Henry, who won the award the year before me. So it's a great class.
I didn't get to read who nominated me, but I got to read some of Walter's, and Heather at IndySoft just wrote him the most. I really got goosebumps when I read that thing. I said, this person is super deserving. I've known Walter for some time, never got to know him super well, but always have known and heard great things of Walter, and everybody says awesome things about you, including your coworkers. So that speaks volumes to who you are and what you do, and appreciate everything you do for metrology. Thank you so much, Walter.
Thanks, Henry. I'm humbled by your statement there. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Walter. And thank you all for listening.